Hi, everyone. Welcome to Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. I'm Langdon DeMint,
And I'm Julian Taylor.
and welcome to our podcast. Welcome to Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. I'm Langdon DeMint, here with my dearest friend and fellow bald brother, Jules. How's it going, buddy?
Hey, Big D, Big L, even. Yeah.
You know, it's funny that you say that. Actually, we're going on a quick detour. You know, for the longest in my childhood, my nickname was Big D.
Was it?
It was. Now, part of that might have been I was a little bigger at an early age, a little heftier.
I think we might need to see some photos of this.
Yeah, I think you've seen them. I think I want to say maybe.
No, I don't think so.
I
Yeah.
try to keep those guarded. On the flip
Okay.
side, it is a part of who I was.
Yeah.
I mean, I was very athletic. I loved playing sports. I just had a slow metabolism. Maybe is the right. Maybe that's the best way to say it. But
I didn't have a slow metabolism. I just liked eating.
well, I liked eating also, and I think the biggest problem was what I liked eating.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't good. I mean, I might eat broccoli, but I might have a double cheeseburger with it, you know. So
I'm with you on that. You can always pick the broccoli out and just eat the cheeseburger.
yeah. But if I did that, I would cut the fries out. So
Well done.
yeah,
Well
thank
done.
you. Thank you. But you're looking a little more tan, maybe.
Well, I'm looking very tanned for somebody who's in the UK in February.
I know. Want to share where no one knows what you've been on your the last time we discussed it, thank goodness, was pre-journey, you know, with the door falling off, but nothing happened. So you're there and back.
I was on a Boeing and I did get quite nervous. So no, I've had a trip to Perth and Melbourne in Australia. Just to make it clear, not Scotland and the central England. It's great because my daughter lives in Australia, so I had a week where she came over and she lay on the beach whilst I was working, and then we met up in the evenings, which was great. So I had some quality time with India, which was great. And I suppose thinking about some of the things we talk about in terms of team building and engagement and leadership, we had a really good time because we had a big company event where we have an annual kickoff, but also we all got together and did an activity afterwards, which was great. And again, on the food theme, we cooked 60 of us cooked a Mexican meal together, which sounds chaotic, but actually it was really good fun. It was a really good sort of team building activity. So, and nobody got food poisoning. That was the most important thing.
I was going to ask, I don't know that anyone has brought up how the food actually was.
It was good. It's pretty good.
Well, you know, when you watch people cook, if you don't know them, what if you get a you know,
A bougie in there. Yeah.
yeah, you know, what if you get a little bug or a little cough or a little you never know. So that's why I was curious.
This is my little hidden secret. I actually trained to be a chef when I left school.
You know, I think you and I have talked about this
I have told you that.
because
Yeah.
I'm kind of jealous. I'm a good cook, honestly. But that is if I couldn't have made a pro golfer. Well, obviously I didn't. So let's rephrase that. I would have loved to have been a chef.
Yeah. So my chipotle coleslaw was pretty good actually, even though I say it myself. Yeah. But no, there were some people, some hidden talents that emerged that evening. It was very good.
Well, good. But now you're back
I'm back
from the down under, back to the real world. And I think potentially, maybe, and I don't know, I guess the thoughts of, were you able to talk to any customers or any organizations while you were down there? I don't know if we even talked about that.
We had a user forum which was great, and I got to talk to lots of customers, and it was really interesting, sort of, to hear the things that they were focusing on, and again the same message is actually it's mainly the same kind of things that people focus on, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in North America. It's the same kind of things that people are focusing on to make a difference. And talked to some interesting people. Might have got one or two people who could potentially be podcast guests. Yeah, so we can introduce an Australian accent into the pod. Makes it very challenging with time zones to actually record it in the first place, with you in Nashville, me here, and Australia. But I'm sure we can manage it. So yeah, we might spread our sort of area of what am I going to call it? I suppose
Influence.
area of influence out to.
We might as well stick with it. You have embraced the influencer, so we might as well just run with it. I think I would
I think I've
concur.
said it before. I love telling my kids that I'm an influencer, and they're still not impressed, and they still roll their eyes at me. So
See,
yeah.
mine are at the age where
You can con them.
7 years old. Yeah, Daddy, you're on this whatever Spotify. Yes, I am. It's good.
Just Google me, honey.
Yeah, YouTube, whatever you choose, it's fine. Well, I think that's a pretty good segue. So I'm curious as to things that you heard, because I think a lot of times we work with organizations, right, of all maturity levels, and we hear common themes, and then we understand there's a common theme, but because every organization is at a different point, how does that common theme, or how can it be applicable, and what are things they can do? And I know for many of our listeners, you've probably, hopefully, have heard this story. If not, I highly encourage you to Google it, DuckDuckGo it, whatever your search engine of choice is, but look it out, read about it, because it can help. I think it can help tell the story. And, it is whatever, 25, 30 years old, but I think you're going to see some applicability of what organizations can do. And Jules, I would ask you to maybe to lead us and read a little bit of the story, and then we'll kind of discuss.
Yep. And I suppose this was prompted through a discussion with Matthew Elson, who's our CEO. And Matthew's got a real focus on actually businesses doing the right thing, and actually we still hurt and kill too many people across the globe in the workplace. And one of the things we were talking about with Matthew, and he talked about it at the user forum, which prompted this week's pod, was how can safety be used as a lever? I'm not going to argue on the pronunciation. How can it be used as a lever, not just to keep people safe, but also to drive better business performance? So we wanted to use this week's pod to tell that story, and it's a story of a really well-known business, and that business really was founded through innovation, and their products or byproducts, just about everybody who listens to the pod will have used. And that company, of course, is Alcoa, and this is where it's going to get really challenging for me and Langdon to agree on pronunciation. They invented the process for smelting aluminum, or aluminium, as we would say in the UK. Yep. So process, aluminium, aluminum.
Lever. This is a tough one.
This is going to be a long pod, isn't it? But their products, when you stop and think about it, their products are used in so many different areas. So from foil that wraps chocolate to Coke tins through to bolts that hold satellites together. And as Langdon said, this story goes back to 1987, and they appointed a new CEO. And as is the way, when you appoint a new CEO to a public business, he had to go and meet with Wall Street, and he had to go and meet with some pretty major investors who got a lot of money invested in Alcoa. At that time, the company was about 100 years old. They were one of the biggest companies in the world, but actually they've been really struggling because they made some crappy decisions. and they'd lost a lot of business actually to competitors. And whilst there was a real desire for this new leadership, the guy who was chosen wasn't well known. He was called Paul O'Neill, but his background was really in government jobs. It wasn't in this type of a business. And to make matters worse, he started this investor meeting in a really unusual way. Because actually what he said, and I'll quote it, was, "I want to talk to you about safety. Every year, numerous Alcoa workers are injured so badly that they miss at least a day of work. And our safety record, it is better than the general American workforce, especially considering the type of work that we do with molten metal and machines that could rip a man's arm off, but it's not good enough." And actually, what I intend to do is make Alcoa the safest company in America, and I intend to go for zero injuries. And I think I'm looking at Langdon here saying that's a pretty ballsy thing to sort of promise, isn't it? When you stop and think about it.
Because what they were having, wasn't it? Didn't they say an accident a week? I don't know, and you might have said that if I missed it, but I want to. I mean, so you think, and I just want to paint that right quick. Zero is nuts, but when you think of something like that,
So it wasn't even an accident a week, mate. It was an accident a week at every plant. So actually, you stop and think about that. It's not the safest business in the world, is it? And whilst we can debate some of the sentiments about zero injuries, which we've talked about before, as not really been maybe the best measure, but you stop and think about that introduction to a bunch of Wall Street guys who are really driven by profit and loss, and actually it probably scared the investors sort of because it broke away from the normal format that people would expect of that kind of a meeting. That kind of a meeting, what they're wanting to hear is how good this guy is, the qualifications he's got to run this business, promises about better profits and about lower costs, about minimizing the impact of taxes and business regulations, and really all those things that excite investors and underpin capitalism. But O'Neill didn't really use any of the buzzwords or even mention any of those things like profits or taxes. He didn't even talk about himself. One thing he did do, and you're going to laugh at this, Langdon, he actually pointed out the safety in the room they were in, so pointing out the fire exits, and I think that kind of almost got treated with some real skepticism. But then he started to get some questions, and the questions that started to come were about those things we've just mentioned. So things like inventories, capital ratios, and his response, good on him, he kept going. So he said, if you want to understand how Alcoa is doing, you need to look at our workplace safety figures. And if we bring injury rates down, it won't be because of cheerleading or corporate speak that you hear from other CEOs. It's going to be because people, and think about businesses, what makes a people tick. It's going to be about individuals at the company who've agreed to become part of something that they see as important. And they've devoted themselves to creating a habit of excellence. And I think that's a really interesting line, isn't it, Langdon? Yeah. And safety will be the indicator that we're making progress in changing habits across the entire institution. So that's how we should be judged. So really, when you stop and think about that, it's a really alternate approach that actually had investors running for the hills and selling stock because they've thought they got a bit of a lunatic in charge. Interestingly, though, within a year of that speech, Alcoa's profits had hit a record high. And a quote from one analyst was, it was literally the worst piece of advice that he'd ever given to sell Alcoa stock. Yeah. And by the time O'Neill retired in 2000, the annual net income was five times larger than it had been. And all that happened as Alcoa actually became one of the safest companies in the world. You said earlier, Langdon, about an incident at every plant every week. Once the safety plan was implemented, the worker injury rate fell to a 20th of the US average. So it definitely made a difference. And And I think one of the interesting things when you read the story is Alcoa was like a big dysfunctional family. And my analogy is, and Langdon's laughing here because I mentioned this to him yesterday, was think Shameless, but with lots of very hot metal. So if you've not watched Shameless, go and watch it because it is quite amusing. But they had big problems because the workforce weren't happy, the unions weren't happy, the management weren't happy. And I think this is the really interesting thing, Langdon. I'm interested on your take on this, that what O'Neill saw was that actually safety was something that was important to everybody. So actually it was a great way to start to unify all those disparate groups and start to get them to pull together. Yeah?
Yeah, I think that, that to me, that's something we hopefully have tried to push through the evolution of the podcast, and even more so as, I can remember, and I know I've given this example, a friend of mine, when, before I got into even before I got into this profession, before I even got into my master's program, excuse me, for this discipline, I remember working with him, just helping, trying to make a little extra money, and watching him go around. We were doing industrial hygiene sampling and studies, and there might be people he would see once a year. Now he's the type, he could talk to, a wall, he could talk to this golfer's lamp that I have right here, and he could carry on a good conversation. But that's him anyway. So walking around and having that understanding of just communicating with people, people he hadn't seen in a year maybe, or whatnot. And I remember talking about that. And then even after I graduated, got into the field and working, and realized that's a big part of it, because that's when you start building that relationship with people, building that camaraderie, when you start wanting their input. So to me, that's a crucial thing that we try to, that's the whole importance of empowering. It's making others, leaders or whatever you want to call it, empowered to want to talk about it, because they're the ones where it matters.
Empowering everybody. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
See, I lined you up perfectly to use the camaraderie word there as well, didn't
I
I?
know. Thank
Hey,
you.
well done.
Made it easy.
So O'Neill came up with a plan, and it was a real sort of major realignment for the business, and the starting point was really understanding why injuries were happening, why were people getting hurt in all of these plants on such a frequent basis, and to understand that, he recognised that you'd really got to understand the manufacturing process and where it had gone wrong. So he sort of ensured that they had the right people in place who could educate around things like quality control, better processes, and make it easier to do things in the right way. And the mantra that he really sort of brought in was, if we do it right, if we do it correctly, actually, it's also going to be safer. So in other words, by becoming a better aluminum or aluminium company, actually they protected workers. So again, I think that's a really great mantra, isn't it? Whatever your business is, by becoming a better business at whatever it is you do, actually you're probably going to keep people safer as well. Yeah. And the next part of his plan then was that whenever somebody was injured, whenever an employee was injured, it was going to trigger a routine. So every time anyone was injured in a work unit or a business unit, the president had to report to him within 24 hours, along with a plan to ensure that it wasn't going to happen again. And the reward was, the only people who got promoted were people who embraced the system. And unit presidents, pretty busy people. So to make that process work, what they had to do was really ensure that the communication channels they had within their business unit worked. So vice presidents needed to hear from the floor managers needed to hear from the workers needed to raise warnings, and they also had to come up with and keep a list of suggestions ready so that when the VP asked for a plan, they had ideas ready. So you stop and think about that, we've got a ripple effect going on here, because it's not just about safety. It actually made people talk to each other and communicate more effectively across the organization. So this is what Matthew was talking about, these levers to actually improve the business performance through safety. Um, so safety started to just drive a whole bunch of new corporate habits, um, and just help to improve not just corporate habits but also behaviours. So the unions stopped opposing rules that would hinder people or stop them from working out how to improve the manufacturing processes. Managers would stop resisting policies in a similar way. And I thought a great one, Langdon, was giving people the autonomy to shut down a production line if they felt that it was getting too busy or unsafe. So they stop the injuries happening before they happen. And again, we've talked about this loads, haven't we? Actually, do people feel able to stop work if they see something that's unsafe?
Yeah, and I think, to me, and I don't know, so I can't speak to, I mean, other than obviously research or whatnot. Previous to really Alcoa, this was before my time, so maybe you can shed more light. You think about it, health and safety has made drastic, or EHS as a whole has made drastic improvements over the last 100 plus years since the foundation, of OSHA, the OSHA Act, whether HSE in the UK. So we've seen a lot of those, but it seems like it was still, you had things you had to do. You had to do X, Y, Z, but it was still very much, I won't say the Wild West, but it was a little unhindered as far as what you could do. And I think that's something that we can, definitely take away. What he did was, and maybe they had good communication prior to this throughout, but he brought the topic of safety and
Yep.
what that does. So then when people were talking about it, and then when you start seeing those positive ramifications, because I can think of a lot of organizations that I've worked with, even in the last few years, it's pretty, there's some that I would say, they're lower maturity, what we would put, that they just haven't had the need, and I don't mean that in a negative light. They just haven't had the need, honestly, for anything. Um, it's the way it is, and that's kind of their view. They're open to discussing if something is come to light, but when someone actually stands up to make a change, to say, "Hey, let's consider this," and that's what we see. I think even now, every year we talk about the NSC releases that the CEOs who get it and the organizations that the best of the best, and it's honestly, it's things that really he kind of instilled as far as that safe operations continually, that you see driving that better change for organizations, which in turn does it for people.
Yep. And it's interesting, isn't it, when you read this story, even just some of the things that started to happen off the back of it. So one of the you think about, they say this very casually, people were getting splashed with molten metal.
Hmm.
Well,
It's only a flesh wound.
it was only a flesh wound. It was only 1500 degrees. Yeah. Um,
You don't need that part of your skin.
yeah. But that was one of the biggest causes of injuries, was people getting splashed when they poured molten aluminium. So actually, one of the things that came out of all of this was they redesigned the way that they poured the molten metal. Um, so not only did it keep people safe, it stopped them getting splashed with molten metal. It actually meant they were wasting less. So they become more profitable because they cut down on wastage and spillage. So just some really pragmatic things that they did that immediately affected people, but at the same time helped the business. So so I just thought it was a really great story. And again, thanks and kudos to Matthew for reminding us about this story so that we could come on here and talk about it. And it may go back a number of years, but I think it still holds true. And I think it's still a message that's got a real relevance today, which is this strong message that safety is a great lever to bring people together. I was talking to a business just this week, and one of the key things they were looking at to improve their safety management system, and one of the key things was to improve retention. And you ask the questions, why is that so important to you? And it might sound blindingly obvious that, yeah, we don't want to lose our people because there's cost associated, yeah. But also it's that loss of talent, isn't it? So actually, if we keep our people, their knowledge improves, they become better at the job, they do a better job, the business improves. So there's just a really logical knock-on effect to a safe workplace, because people don't want to work in unsafe places and people leave unsafe places.
Well, that's the. I think to me that is a really crucial aspect that we don't consider as much, and especially now we think about the younger generation, the work. I mean, we know I dare say it's similar in South Cave and the wider London. I mean, we have trouble here having people work. I mean, it's, restaurants that used to, you could go, and I'm just using a restaurant as an example, but you would go, there were workers everywhere. You could go to that same restaurant, Chili's, whatever it is, and you're just kind of looking around and you count 4 or 5 workers, and you thought it was COVID that really, and I think that's what began that. But now, even more so, younger generation, if they don't see that they're being taken care of, if they don't see that, I mean, there's some negative that, we don't have to get into, but just some of the basics, I know polls and studies have been done that if they don't feel safe and they don't see it, they're not going to do it. So
You
you
take
think
off,
about
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah,
And that's a ton of, there's hazards in any job for the most part, but there's some that we have to have that they're relatively high hazard. I mean, it could be an electricity worker. I mean, it doesn't matter, whatever. So if we don't figure out ways to instill that safe operation mindset, or continually try to grow and help them understand the importance of the organization and the employee, I think to me, you hit that nail perfectly, because it's very much, there is a positive ROI. Now, valid, for Alcoa, they saw drastic improvements because, direct costs started changing, the indirect costs associated with incidents, with fatalities, medical, yada yada. So that changed, but then you start continually seeing the increase of revenues because of lost time, because of injuries. And that's, to me, even if you're still with an organization that, we don't want to get people hurt, but profit, profit, profit.
yeah.
I dare say, and I know I'm definitely could be proven wrong, there are still a lot of organizations that are having incidents and having expenditures that are associated with those, even if they don't think it is that drastic. So you think about just reducing it. I mean, and that's strictly a number. That's not even talking about the true moral of why you want to, why you want to do it. I was reading about an organization that, uh, well, a friend of mine actually works at one, and one of the best things I feel like you can do is when you're, if something changes, Alcoa did it when they were losing some of the aluminum or the molten hot during the smelting process. In the design phase, if you incorporate EHS perspectives in the design phase, that means you're considering it before it could even lead to something. That's when you start seeing changes, when you're thinking about it pre, then during, and then post, to make sure that it's been done and you're open to those changes. So it's that continual journey, right? That
Yeah,
every time you think about it.
I think that's a great point. If you think back to the pod we did with Nick from Lotus, he made that point, didn't he? Which was, and it was a great to hear, was when they built their new factory for building the new cars. Actually, the safety team were involved in the design of the production lines. So actually, they could ensure that actually we can try and prevent incidents before we've even started producing anything. So I think it's a great point. I think I think another sort of learning point from this story is something I think we've talked about it before, which is in terms of the health and safety professionals is being influencers. You've got to be influencers if you're going to make safety really something that happens across an organization. And I think one of the morals of this story is that actually, who's interested in safety? And you think about that, it's unions, it's managers, it's senior leadership, but also it's investors into the business. Everybody's got an interest in safety because it can play a really powerful part in terms of that overall business performance.
And that's the challenge a lot of times, is if some of the senior level don't see the importance, you have to be an influencer as to why does it matter? What can we change? How can it be better? And that's, some of the most difficult conversations are those that aren't having a lot of incidents or old school, quote unquote, in processes and procedures, but they're not having anything and they do care about everybody. Those are some of the most difficult, because they sometimes it's difficult to see the need for change. And if you don't have a fresh set of eyes, it's
Yeah. Or they're not having incidents, they're getting reported, let's put it like that. So yeah. I mean, I think on a final note from me is the thing I love is we see it so often, and again we've talked about this before, is we see it and hear it so often where senior leadership are going, yeah, safety's our priority. Safety's our number one priority. But actually that's not then reflected in the day-to-day activities of the organization. And I think this is a really great example of a CEO who is saying, yeah, safety's our number one priority, but then actually following through on that kind of statement to make sure that it is a priority and that priority runs through everything that the business does.
yeah. No, I would echo that. And I think for me, it's very much, it is having an organization as a, as an EHS professional. It's very much understanding that I want to work for a company that cares about EHS, that cares about my safety, and then what we're providing likewise. And right, there's a lot that don't. I've been very, very fortunate in my experiences, for the most part, have, and maybe hit some periods where they didn't, but that's the organizations you see changes. And you brought that up earlier, and uh, giving an unintended shout out, conversations we have with Matthew or anything, he's very much, he sees that valid. Or are we a high hazard industry? By no means.
Yep.
And but he understands the importance, so brings it. So for me, it's refreshing, because I'm like, that's my profession. That's great to hear. So when we're transpiring and carrying that out, I think there's something, there's an easier value add conversation that you can have when you understand the mission, so to speak. I mean, valid, we all have to be, we talk about that chart, we all have to be profitable. I'm not negating that, but if you understand the how you can equal the ultimate profits, which Paul O'Neill, he did definitely, I think that's when we can continue seeing better improvements.
So, moral of the story, I wish I'd invested in Alcoa in 1987.
I wish I was old enough to have understood what that meant at the time.
I love it when I hear you talking about young people.
Well, see, that's what, that's the thing. I can walk the line because I'm not old by any means, but there's a drastic difference in my, you know, going on 39 years this year versus 24-year-old.
And at that, I think that's a good point to wrap the pod. So I'm going to let you wrap us up, mate.
Well, everyone, we appreciate you joining once again. We look forward to seeing you next time. And as you're going about your daily walks within your organizations, with your friends, with your coworkers, with your dearest family members, remember to stay healthy and safe and watch each other's back out there. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, everyone. Really appreciate you tuning into this episode of Two Bald Guys Talking Safety. Please follow and subscribe to wherever you stream your favorite podcast, or visit us at evotix.com.
And if you want to see how follically challenged we really are, come and check us out on YouTube. If you've got value from the podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts, and in the review section of this podcast, if you could leave us a review or a rating, that would be great.
And as always, everyone, while you're going about your days and about your normal lives, stay safe out there and watch each other's back.